So you have finished taking notes about the 4 macromolecules, and we're getting ready to do a big lab where you're going to use indicators to test for those macromolecules. But we want to spend a few minutes before we start thinking about the lab to go back and think about these 4 macromolecules. Because it's really easy to get into a lab and start mixing stuff together and not really remember why exactly you're doing the lab. So on page 8, we're just going to start and flip through the notes a little bit and remind ourselves what the macromolecules are. Remember, macromolecules are also called polymers, and they're made up of small repeating units called monomers. We talked about carbohydrates, both small and large, and this is where we see the first example of an indicator. The first one is Benedict's. Benedict's indicator will indicate if glucose, or please add in the word simple sugar, is present. If we have a complex carb like starch, then we use an indicator called iodine. So there are 2 indicators for carbohydrates, a simple sugar indicator and a complex starch indicator. And you'll get to see how those are used. We also studied lipids, and we have an indicator for lipids, that is the brown paper bag. So if you'll put a star by this indicator, we'll be using this indicator in the lab if we want to test for lipids. But remember, lipids are also sometimes called fats. So far we have 3 indicators. Your next macromolecule is nucleic acids, made of nucleotides, and there were 2 types of nucleic acids, deoxyribo and ribonucleic acid. There are indicators for these, but we won't be using them in our lab. So far 3, Benedict's, iodine, and paper bag. The 4th indicator that we'll be using will indicate if protein is present. And so this indicator is called Bayer-Rent, and it will indicate if protein is present. So we want to put a star by that. So remember that the information about the indicators is in your notes. Ms. Long is now going to talk you through each of the indicators and what they look like, and I'm going to demonstrate it as we go. Just one piece of important information. We are using some chemicals, Bayer-Rent, iodine, Benedict's, that can cause severe damage to your eyes. In fact, there was a student at Butler once who got this in her eyes, and her eyesight was damaged. So we wear our super fashionable biology accessory safety goggles. And if you're too cool to wear these, you're too cool to do the lab. So we will wear them all the time that you're doing the lab, and we'll wear them right now. If you will go ahead and turn to page A7, assignment 7. It's called the case of the missing swag. We're going to show you the indicators that you're going to be using. And so we're going to go through a PowerPoint, but you can take some time to look over the lab as well.
So right now we're going to go over the indicator test. I'm going to explain the color changes that you'll see to identify if the molecule is present or not present. And Ms. Gamiti is going to show you actually how to perform the lab. So the first indicator test that we have is to detect carbohydrates. And this one specifically is going to be to detect our simple sugars, like glucose. The test is called Benedict's. And with Benedict's, you're going to start off as this light blue color. And if it's present, it's going to turn to this orange, almost a yellow-orange color.
But only if it's boiled. So for this test, you actually have to add it to boiling water. And that's another reason why you have to wear your safety goggles. Now when you perform the test, you're going to be filling the test tube about 1/4 full of water. It doesn't have to be exact, but the idea is that you're going to be adding a sample, And we want to add a little bit of the sample, but we need enough liquid to be able to see it. And so I'm going to go ahead and, as the directions say, I'm going to add 15 drops of the test sample. Now, when you do this, you're not going to know what you're adding. It's going to be a mystery. However, and so here's your sample that you'll be using. You can see that it's a mixture of many things. We want to show you what it looks like when you add glucose. So you'll count 15 drops, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And at this point, it still kind of looks clear. And next it tells me to add 4 drops of the Benedicts. Not dropperfuls, but just drops. So notice 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's still blue. That's because this test has to be boiled. So I put the test tube into the hot water. We'll let it sit. And when I'm ready to take it out, I'll have to make sure that I use test tube clamps. It's helpful to start the Benedict's test first because then you can wait for it while you're doing the other tests.
Okay. So the next test that we have is also for carbohydrates, and this is going to be to detect our complex carbohydrates like starch. The test itself is called iodine, and it'll be in one of your brown bottles. It's going to start off as a yellow-orange color, and if starch is present, it'll turn into a dark blue-black color.
So when you perform your test, you'll be adding some of your sample to the test tube. Remember, you're testing this unknown sample, but I'm going to actually show you what it looks like if you're adding starch. So I add my 15 drops of starch. And you'll notice
you have to add the water first to it.
I don't see a color change yet. But when I add my 4 drops of iodine,
it's going to start off as your yellow-orange color.
and when we add the starch, it will actually turn bluish black. And so you can see the blue-black color that it will turn when you add starch and iodine together. Iodine by itself, remember, will start as like a yellow-orange color. But when we actually add both starch and iodine together, we get this purple, blue, black. So that is the iodine test.
The next test that we have, our third test, is going to be for lipids. And with lipids, you're just going to have your brown paper bag. You're going to start with your dry brown paper bag, and if lipids are present on your sample, well then the paper bag will become a little transparent when you hold it up to the light.
This test will be a little bit different. You don't need a test tube. You just need a piece of brown paper bag. And you're not going to add water to it. You're just going to add your sample directly to it. And when you put 2 drops of lipid or oil onto a brown paper bag, you'll actually be able to see a grease spot, and it will be transparent through the light.
And then our last test is going to be for proteins. Now for proteins, we'll have a test called BioRent. It's going to detect if the protein is present. It starts as a blue color. Starts off as a blue color and will actually turn a purple, sometimes even pink color in the test tube.
So remember, you always start by adding a little bit of water to your test tube, or back to using the test tube. And now we're going to add the protein to it. I add my 15 drops. And then I add my 4 drops of the BioRent. Notice that the BioRent also starts as blue, kind of like Benedict's. but biuret tells me if protein is present. And so this should turn a slight purple color. It's a little bit harder to see. We might need to add a little bit more of the indicator, but it won't be quite as blue, it will turn more purple. And so you can see the test a little bit clearer here in this picture. We might even turn the light off for a second so that you can see it. So notice light blue and then a darker purple.
And then, just as a little reminder, for our nucleic acids, we're not going to have an indicator test for nucleic acids. So we'll just be using the 4 tests that we've talked about.
Miss Long, if you'll pull up the lab. While we're still waiting for our Benedicts to finish boiling, we have a few minutes and we're going to fill out the first part of the lab. Please make sure that you fill this part out, and that will mean that you're ready for the lab. So we're going to fill out the background information starting with the sentence, and Miss Long will talk to you through. She's going to tell you the initial color that it starts as, but make sure you go back to your notes to fill in the color change. Miss Long, if you can add in color change if macromolecule present. So it'll only change colors if the macromolecule is present. And you might have seen me slip into the back room to get something to put in this test tube, because the original starch that I put in must have broken down since last year, and I needed to add pure starch to be able to get this.
Okay. So with our background information, you want to start with the first sentence. It says you remember that a chemical indicator changes, and that's going to be color, when a particular molecule is present. So when one of our macromolecules is going to be present. The first macromolecule was our simple sugar, which we also call glucose, or it can be glucose. The indicator that we use here is going to be Benedict's. And you want to look back for a second and see if you can figure out what the initial color for Benedict's was. What was it? It was going to be blue. One helpful way to remember what color it starts off with is both of our indicators that start with a B also start off as a blue color. Then for starch,
And we can actually see what's going to happen if glucose is present. So you can see that it started as blue and it changed color after we boiled it.
for our starch test, remember that both of these are both going to be our carbohydrates, carbs, and starch was our longer, more complex carbohydrate. The indicator that we use here is iodine. Iodine is going to start off as a red-orange color. And then if it's present, well, what's our color change going to be? You want to fill that out. For proteins, this is going to be biuret. Again, starts with a B. The color is going to start off as a blue color. And what was our color change again? And you want to make sure you go and fill that in to be prepared for our lab.
And I just wanted to show you again, because I think you might be able to see it a little bit better after it sat for a while, how dark blue it was to start with, and how now it's more of a light blue or lavender purple color.
And our very last test is going to be for our lipids, our fats. This is going to be our brown bag test. Remember, brown bag, initial color is just going to be brown. And after you put your sample on there and let it dry for just a little bit, you should be able to see some sort of color change. So make sure you do take a few minutes to go back and fill in your color change and prepare yourself for the lab that's coming up.